In places of learning, trust is the bedrock. But what happens when that sacred bond is shattered by those entrusted with nurturing young minds? Tonight, we delve into the shadows where authority became a weapon and innocence was betrayed. These are not mere headlines. They are haunting chronicles of lives irrevocably altered by a shocking abuse of power within American schools. How could those meant to guide, lead children into such darkness? The case of Stacey Dean Rambold from Billings, Montana, is a harrowing story that underscores the devastating consequences of judicial leniency and the power of public outrage in the face of profound injustice. Rambold, a high school teacher, was convicted of raping a 14-year-old student, Charisse Morales, an act that occurred in 2008. Despite the heinous nature of the crime, his initial sentence in 2013 was shockingly light: 15 years with all but 30 days suspended. This sentence, widely perceived as a gross miscarriage of justice, sparked immense public fury and disbelief. The community reeled, questioning how such a violent betrayal of trust could result in a mere slap on the wrist. Tragically, the victim, Charisse, unable to bear the trauma and the perceived failure of the justice system, took her own life at the age of 17, shortly after Rambold's initial sentencing. Her death amplified the public outcry and shone a harsh spotlight on the judicial handling of the case. As reported by CNN and the Billings Gazette, the immense public pressure and subsequent legal actions led to a re-evaluation. In 2014, Rambold's sentence was significantly hardened. He was ordered to serve 10 years in prison for violating the conditions of his probation, a probation he likely should never have been granted. This tragic saga became a catalyst for discussions on sentencing reform for sexual offenses and highlighted the critical need for the courts to prioritize the well-being of victims. When the system initially fails to protect the innocent and deliver justice, can any subsequent action ever truly mend the profound damage inflicted not only on the victim, but on society's faith itself? The quiet community of Westmoreland, Tennessee, was jolted in 2022 by allegations against Carrie Norman, a local teacher. The accusations were deeply disturbing. Norman was charged with attempting to bribe a 16-year-old male student into a sexual relationship. The alleged manipulation didn't stop there. Reports indicated she had also sent him explicit photographs, a stark violation of her professional duties and the trust placed in her. As she faced the judicial process, the gravity of her situation was undeniable, with the looming threat of significant prison time. The case took an even darker turn when investigators reportedly discovered narcotics in her possession, adding another layer to the charges and painting a more complex, troubling portrait of the teacher. Sources like WKRN and Lenta.ru highlighted the community's shock and the widespread concern among parents who suddenly found themselves questioning the safety of their children within the school environment. Norman's actions, if proven, represent not just a personal failing, but a tear in the fabric of communal trust. The alleged attempt to coerce a minor, compounded by the drug charges, suggested a life spiraling out of control, with devastating potential consequences for the young people in her charge. When educators themselves become sources of such profound moral and legal breaches, how can a community begin to heal and restore its faith in the very institutions designed to nurture its youth? The case of Deborah LaFave, a middle school teacher in Temple Terrace, Florida, became a national headline in the early 2000s, igniting a firestorm of debate and public scrutiny. In 2005, LaFave was sentenced for sexual relations with a 14-year-old student from Angelo L. Greco Middle School. The age of the victim, barely a teenager, amplified the sense of outrage and betrayal. Initially facing the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, LaFave ultimately accepted a plea deal: 3 years of house arrest followed by 7 years of probation. She was also mandated to register as a sex offender, a lifelong label. The case gained notoriety not only for the crime itself, but for Lefebvre's public apologies, which some saw as heartfelt and others as calculated attempts to garner sympathy. Live journal discussions from the time captured the public's divided sentiment and intense media focus. Her relatively lenient sentence, avoiding significant prison time for such a serious offense, sparked considerable controversy. Many questioned whether the justice system was truly holding her accountable, particularly given the profound vulnerability of a 14-year-old. The crime wasn't just a physical violation, it was an exploitation of developmental immaturity, a calculated grooming that preyed on a child's trust in an authority figure. This case forced a difficult conversation. When the system delivers a sentence perceived by many as too soft, what message does it send about the value of a child's safety and the sanctity of the student-teacher relationship? The case of Mary Kay Letourneau is arguably one of the most infamous and debated instances of teacher-student sexual abuse in United States history, largely due to its unusual and highly publicized trajectory. Letourneau, a teacher in Seattle, Washington, was first arrested in 1996 and subsequently convicted in 1997 for her sexual relationship with Vili Fualau, who was then her 12-year-old sixth-grade student. The stark age difference and the undeniable power imbalance were shocking. Initially, she reached a plea deal that might have resulted in a more lenient sentence, but she violated its terms by continuing her illicit contact with Fualau, leading to a sentence of over 7 years in prison. What truly catapulted the case into the national consciousness was that Letourneau had 2 children with Fualau, the first conceived while she was his teacher. After her release from prison, in an outcome that many found bewildering and controversial, she married Fualau in 2005. Their subsequent life together, often under media scrutiny, kept the story alive for decades. Sources like LiveJournal extensively documented the public's fascination and revulsion. The narrative challenged conventional understanding of victimhood and agency, though the law was clear about Fualau's status as a victim due to his age. It forced society to grapple with complex questions about consent, grooming, and the long-term psychological ramifications of such relationships, especially when they evolved in such an unorthodox public manner. How do we reconcile the image of a loving mother and wife with that of a felon who committed a profound act of child abuse, forever blurring the lines of a young boy's life? The nationwide manhunt for Tad Cummins, a 50-year-old teacher from Culleoka, Tennessee, and his 15-year-old student in the spring of 2017, gripped the nation, highlighting the terrifying reality of predatory grooming and abduction. Cummins, who taught health sciences, disappeared with the young girl, sparking an Amber Alert and a desperate search that spanned multiple states. This wasn't a spontaneous act. Investigations later revealed a period of careful manipulation and grooming, where Cummins exploited his position of authority to gain the student's trust and affection, ultimately leading her away from her family and safety. They were eventually found in a remote cabin in Northern California after more than a month on the run. The relief of her discovery was immense, but the details of her ordeal were deeply disturbing. Cummins faced federal charges due to transporting a minor across state lines for the purpose of illegal sexual activity. As NBC News and other outlets extensively documented, he ultimately pleaded guilty and, in 2018, was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The case exposed the chilling effectiveness of predatory teachers who methodically break down a student's boundaries and isolate them. It underscored the profound vulnerability of teenagers and the critical importance of recognizing the warning signs of inappropriate adult attention. Cummins's betrayal was not just of one student, but of an entire community that trusted him with their children's well-being. When a figure of authority so methodically plans and executes such a devastating betrayal, how deep must the roots of that manipulation run, and what can truly protect the vulnerable from such calculated deceit? Brianna Altus, an English teacher in Davis County, Utah, was meant to inspire a love of language and literature in her high school students. Instead, she authored a dark narrative of deceit and exploitation. In 2015, Altis faced the consequences of her actions, receiving a sentence that could see her imprisoned for up to 30 years, though with a possibility of parole after just 2, for engaging in sexual relationships with 3 of her students, 2 16-year-olds and 1 17-year-old. The relationships, which began in 2013, didn't start with overt abuse, but with a subtle, insidious grooming process. Flirting that blurred professional lines, kisses that were deeply inappropriate, escalating to intimate encounters. Altis chose to accept a plea deal, perhaps to avoid the full glare of a public trial. However, the courtroom still heard the profound impact of her actions. As reported by the Daily Mail, the mother of one victim delivered a powerful statement, articulating the severe emotional trauma and the invisible scars her child would carry. The case ignited fierce debate across Utah and beyond about the dynamics of power in the classroom and the devastating consequences when teachers exploit their authority. Altis's defense may have painted a picture of a woman who made terrible mistakes, but the prosecution highlighted a pattern of predatory behavior. How does one reconcile the image of an educator with the cold reality of a manipulator who preys on the very students she is sworn to protect, shattering their trust in authority figures? Rachel Bauer, a 25-year-old teacher from Frankston, Texas, became another name in the distressing litany of educators who shattered the sacred trust placed in them. In 2015, Bauer was sentenced to 10 years in prison for engaging in inappropriate sexual relationships with her students. Her transgressions included sending explicit photographs to multiple students and, devastatingly, entering into an intimate relationship with one of them, an act legally defined as sexual assault due to the age of the minor and her position of authority. The court's decision didn't end with incarceration. Bauer also received 10 years of probation, which she would begin serving upon her release, a long shadow cast over her future, and a permanent mark as a registered sex offender. The BBC News Russian service, among other outlets, reported on this case, noting it as part of a deeply concerning trend of similar crimes among American educators. Bauer's actions, driven by what one can only speculate were profound personal failings and a shocking lack of moral compass, ripped through the Frankston community. Parents were left to grapple with the fear that the very individuals tasked with educating and safeguarding their children could become the source of such harm. The psychological impact on the students involved, betrayed by someone they likely admired or trusted, is immeasurable. When youth and authority are so dangerously mixed, resulting in such exploitation, what societal guardrails have failed, and how can we ensure that the classroom remains a sanctuary for learning, not a hunting ground for predators? Jennifer Fichter, a teacher at Florida's Central Aerospace Academy, presented the image of a dedicated educator, someone parents and students alike might have looked up to. Yet, beneath this veneer of professionalism, a disturbing pattern of manipulation and abuse was unfolding. Between the years 2011 and 2014, Fichter engaged in illicit sexual relationships with 3 17-year-old male students. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a single, regrettable mistake. It was a calculated series of transgressions, a profound betrayal of trust that played out over an extended period. She sent them explicit messages, engaged in intimate encounters, and the devastating reality of her actions was further underscored when it was revealed she had become pregnant by one of the teens. The investigation brought forth irrefutable evidence: DNA, a trail of digital communication, painting a clear picture of her guilt. Fichter eventually pleaded guilty, attributing her actions to emotional instability. But can such a profound abuse of power, such a calculated grooming of vulnerable young men, truly be dismissed as mere instability? The community in Lakeland was rocked, grappling with how a teacher, a supposed role model, could commit such acts. The courtroom heard of the psychological damage inflicted, the innocence stolen. Fichter was sentenced to 22 years in prison in 2015, a term reflecting the severity and multiplicity of her crimes. The Daily Mail reported that her defense attorney stated she was profoundly sorry. Yet one must ask, when the very essence of a teacher's role is to protect and nurture, what truly drives one to exploit that sacred bond in such a devastating way, leaving lifelong scars on young lives? Pamela Rogers, a teacher from Tennessee, became a chilling example of how an initial leniency in the justice system can be met with continued, brazen defiance. In 2006, Rogers was convicted for engaging in sexual relations with a 13-year-old student, an age that underscores the predatory nature of the offense. She initially received a 7-year prison sentence. However, the betrayal did not end with her conviction. In a shocking turn, in 2007, an additional 2 years were added to her sentence. The reason? Rogers had violated the terms of her probation by continuing to contact her young victim, sending explicit photos and videos even after being disciplined by the court. This demonstrated a disturbing lack of remorse and a persistent, obsessive focus on the child she had already grievously harmed. As chronicled in online discussions and archives like LiveJournal, her case highlighted the immense challenge of monitoring offenders and protecting victims, even after the legal process has run its course. The initial sentence might have been seen by some as a chance for Rogers to reflect and reform, but her subsequent actions painted a picture of someone deeply entrenched in their illicit desires, unwilling or unable to cease the abuse. The case sparked intense debate about the effectiveness of probation conditions for educators convicted of such crimes and the psychological hold an abuser can maintain. When an offender shows such blatant disregard for legal constraints and continues to torment their victim, what does it reveal about the true depth of their depravity and the system's struggle to truly sever such toxic ties? In the community of Johnston County, North Carolina, the foundations of trust between students, parents, and educators were shaken by the case of Amanda Dahl, a 37-year-old English teacher. In 2022, Dahl was convicted of the statutory rape of a 15-year-old male student. Court documents, as reported by local media outlets like MK, revealed that the crime occurred on August 12th of that year, with Dahl engaging in sexual intercourse with the teenager on at least one occasion. This led to serious charges, including taking indecent liberties with a child and second-degree rape of a minor. The immediate consequence for Dahl was her dismissal from the school system, a swift action reflecting the severity of the allegations. She was subsequently incarcerated, though the specific length of her full sentence wasn't widely publicized in initial reports. The case underscored the grim reality that such abuses of power are not confined to any single demographic of educator or student. The betrayal is equally profound, regardless of the genders involved. For the 15-year-old victim, the experience undoubtedly left deep emotional and psychological wounds, a violation of his innocence by someone in a position of significant influence and trust. The social environment of the school was irrevocably tainted, forcing uncomfortable but necessary conversations about boundaries, consent, and the vigilance required to protect students. When the very language of trust is twisted into a tool of manipulation and abuse by an educator, how do young people navigate their formative years without cynicism? And what does true accountability for such a devastating breach look like? These narratives serve as a somber call to vigilance, to listen to the often unspoken fears of the vulnerable, and to ensure that our institutions of learning are truly sanctuaries, not hunting grounds. We must ask ourselves, how can we better fortify the trust between students and educators, and what societal changes are needed to prevent such devastating betrayals from ever happening again? Thank you for joining us in this difficult but necessary exploration. If these stories have moved you, or if you have thoughts on how we can collectively work toward safer environments for our children, please share your perspectives respectfully in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found it informative and subscribe for more true crime stories that demand our attention and reflection. Stay safe and stay vigilant.